Hello and welcome to Stand By Please with Jackie George from Sharjah Performing Arts Academy and me, Antonia Collins from the Bamboo Manager Project. In this podcast we talk all things stage management. Join us and our guests as we try to answer the question, what is your stage manager really thinking? We hope you enjoy. Hello, Jackie George.
Hi, Antonia. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm really good. Now, I'm going to ask you a question actually before we start.
Yeah.
Because in episode 1 of this season, when we talked about the 4-day working week, you said, come back to me in a couple of weeks and I'll tell you how it's going. So I thought we could start today by coming back to you in a couple of weeks. How is the 4-day week going?
It's going okay. The plus sides of what I get from a 4-day week are huge in my personal life in terms of time at home, time with friends and family. All of that is really good. The minus sides, is that even proper English? Probably not. But the negatives of a 4-day working week is what you can get done in 4 days. And I'm feeling dissatisfied with the amount of work I'm able to achieve in a 4-day week. Now, that is not about me wanting to work more. I'd like to continue with this 4-day week, but I need to work out how to work smarter. And I think it's absolutely fantastic conversation to say 4-day week, this is so positive for work-life balance. I absolutely agree. But like with anything in life, if you want to make something, let's say we've got a recipe for a 4-day week, what are our ingredients to make it the best 4-day week? And I don't think I've got those nailed yet. So I'm going to work on a little toolkit for myself into how to work smarter to make a 4-day week positive on all counts. So that's where I'm at the moment on it.
Today, we thought, this is not, and let's discuss something that Antonia wants to discuss. We thought we would talk about what to do when things go wrong in your stage management career, because you and I are endlessly positive, aren't we, right? We are two people that believe being a stage manager can be a great job and a great career for people. And what we don't reflect on very often, or never actually in 4 seasons of episodes, is what to do when things go wrong. And I thought we could talk about, practical things to do when things go wrong, but also maybe trying to unpick a little bit about, is it a serious thing or is it not a serious thing? Should I stay in the job? Shouldn't I stay in the job? And I think I want to put a kind of caveat on the top to say, we can talk about it in these ways because most stage management jobs don't last very long, right?
Yeah.
So most contracts, even at its outer edges, most contracts would be for a year, which at the time might seem like a very long time, but overall in your life, they're not. Whereas a lot of stage management contracts last 5 weeks, 7 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that. So it's nowhere near it's not the same as if you are in a permanent full-time post. So I think that does give some more flexibility in it.
And for context, for myself and for everyone, are we talking specifically about what to do when things go wrong personally in our careers, or what to do when things go wrong in a stage management scenario?
I was going to say, how long have we got? We always aim to make it like 25 minutes. I feel like this could be a much longer topic. I suppose I was thinking about in stage management, you, like, for example, right, at this precise moment, literally at this precise moment, I have been putting together a team of stage managers for me to work with on a show for 7 weeks in the summer. And I'm the stage manager, and I've been putting a DSM and an ASM and a work placement together. And so because I did that, I believe we're going to be a good mix. I've picked us for certain reasons. We bring different things to the party. I think we'll be good. But that's quite unusual I think to be able to have that much input into who's in your team, and quite often you get an ASM job and you put in a team with people that you don't know at all. And then there's this expectation that it's all going to be rosy and rainbows and unicorns. And it might not be. And I thought it might be useful to try and unpack, when should you leave? When should you stay? Where to go for help and advice? Because actually, how many other stage managers do you know? You know, we're quite isolated sometimes, that we don't know.
We are massively isolated, aren't we? That was one of the reasons why a while ago we started up the Wales Stage Management Network, because as an industry, when we're in a show team, we're good at supporting each other in that way. And you might know of other stage managers. But for example, the reason why you and I got to communicate and talk and meet was because we were working together in the same building. Whereas prior to that, there were stage managers, like professionally, who I knew of, and I may have bumped into a Stage Management Association event or the ABTT show, but I didn't really know them, and I could never reach out to them as that support network, because we're not competitive, but because our circles don't cross paths, and we all kind of just move companies or shows or venues or touring, whatever we do, we don't have the water cooler moment as an industry, do we? So yeah, I think that's really important, actually.
Well, and we've talked about it before, that, you know, if you're in a team, you are the only company stage manager in that team. You are the only deputy stage manager in that team. There's only the one of you. Okay, you might have two ASMs, but there's no guarantee that you get on really well with the other ASM, is there? Do you mean, why is that a given? Just because you're a stage manager means that you're going to get on? I don't know any other industry that thinks that would be a winner in any way, shape or form. And you might not get on professionally, and you might not get on personally. You know, they're two different things, aren't they? You know, you might hate the way they lay out their props table and think, you know, they might be the kind of person that takes a bit of Alex tape to put on the props table, and they rip it with their hands. See?
No.
And then they might not write neatly what the item is. I'm sort of half joking. But you know, that doesn't mean they're a worse ASM than you. That just means it's different. Do you know what I mean? It still does the job. So I think there are like professional things and there are personal things that mean that you might not get on with somebody.
I think one thing I've learned with experience is that it's letting go of the everyone can be friends. But that doesn't mean to say, if I'm not friends with a colleague, whether it's an ASM or whether it's another member of the production team, doesn't mean to say that I don't like them, or I don't get on with them, or I don't want to socialize with them, or I can't do my job with them. But it does mean, you know, that I don't need to know everything about them, or, you know, what their favorite color is, what they're going to have for dinner tomorrow. But in order that, I guess what I'm saying more succinctly is that bit of distance between myself and a colleague is okay. And that took me a long time to be okay with. I thought I had to, you know, be absolutely invested in every person in the team. And you can't emotionally, you can't be invested. And I think that bit of distance for me, is a little bit protective. And I always remember talking, and we talk about, you know, that dynamic of a production team and a company, especially if you're on tour and you're living, those people do become your family.
One of the things we talked about in the Lou Platt wellbeing episode that people love so much was about who is the person outside of this circle that you're in that you use to talk to and reflect upon things and rant about things and do, but having that other person that you can phone, you know, that was one of the bits of advice she gave us in that episode, and that still remains one of my bits of advice, especially when it's not going so well. Having that other person there to talk to is really invaluable, I think.
Definitely. I think that's a great coping strategy and mechanism. to do that. I was trying to think, context for me is really important. But that's really easy to say, isn't it? If something's going wrong and you know what to do when things go wrong, if something is going wrong, then context of what we're doing. And, the classic line is, when you're doing a show, we're not doing brain surgery, we're not solving world peace. But that's easier said than done. And if our internal fight or flight mode kicks into play, like, which is it going to be? I'm going to ask you a question now. Have you ever walked off a job?
No, I came very close once. I was thinking about this, knowing that we were going to record this episode today. When I was a young stage manager, I think I was 23, maybe. I was a stage manager of a tour of a musical that was touring to kind of number one size venues in the UK. And here's a recipe for disaster for you. The director was also the company manager.
Ugh. Why?
I know, right? Why? Yeah. And actually, he knew very little, I would say, he knew a lot about directing, but didn't know very much about, getting the set in the right place and he had I was a 23-year-old young woman and he was much older. He had a real chip on his shoulder about me and he would belittle me in front of everybody and say, oh, well, she's done that wrong, or that's not right, or and I remember very distinctly being in a venue thinking, I'm going to walk. This isn't worth it. But of course, at 23, I thought if I walked off that job, I'd never work again.
Right.
Because I believe that. Anyway, 3 weeks to the end of the tour, we were in Wimbledon. And I was staying with one of my oldest friends who was also a stage manager. And she said to me, right, well, you've got a choice, haven't you? Either you leave or you say, do you know what? Stuff you. I'm just going to do these 3 weeks and never see you again. And we really talked it through. There we go. That's about having an ally, having a friend, isn't it? I remember we sat and talked about it for hours and I did it and I just distanced myself from him and I got to the end of the show and I've never seen him again, ever, ever, ever. And then I was going on to another, I think I was going to Singapore next. I was going on to a really lovely next job as well. But that was the closest I've ever come. If that happened to me now, would I walk? Yes. Or certainly I would take some of the steps that we will probably talk about next in an action plan of what to do. I think there are things that I would walk over for sure now. I think, as from being 23 as a stage manager to being a 52-year-old stage manager, there's an ocean of years there, isn't there, in between those two things. And the way in which I would allow people to talk to me and speak to me now is very different. But yeah, he was a bully. There's no two way. He was a bully who clearly was scared of me, or scared of the fact that, because everybody else would be like, oh no, that Antonia's right, that's what she's, and I was like, okay, so, but my friend helped me see that as well. And I think sometimes doing that kind of putting yourself in the other person's shoes and working out what makes them tick a little bit can be a useful tool at that level of thing. I feel like I want to put another disclaimer out that clearly there's a world of difference between somebody being a bit annoying and a bit of a bully to, sexual harassment or something way more serious. In my case, he didn't like me and he made it very clear. Okay, well, guess what? I didn't like him either. The feeling was definitely mutual. But, if there'd have been a different thing, if it'd been way more serious, then yes, I think, would I have walked? I don't know, age 23, maybe I wouldn't. I would now, absolutely. And I'd walk with Twitter following behind. Have you ever walked off a job?
Almost. But the situation I almost walked on was actually quite late on. It was, looking back, I think, should I have done it? Should I have had that conversation? And yes, because again, the conduct of the people who were supposed to be leading the charge from the front was not professional, and their behaviour was being reinforced by the people who could have changed it. And I could see how it was affecting everyone around. And then if you're a company manager and you have no autonomy to support the cast in the situation they're in, then why are you there?
Yeah.
So,
and I think,
yeah.
Well, I think we're both saying the same thing, aren't we? And, obviously, if there is a concern that's about the professional role, right? So if it's because of bullying or because of, unacceptable behavior, or it's because of, fights that are going wrong or something like that, then, or a health and safety issue, which is probably the thing I would most easily walk out over, if you see what I mean. If a health and safety thing was being disregarded, then I think that would be simple in many ways, because I wouldn't want the responsibility of something going wrong. But of course, step one is to go to your superior. So if you're the DSM is to go to the stage manager go to the company manager go to the producer. Now, if you go to the producer and they go, yeah, well, it's all right, isn't it? Then you've got to make a decision on your own, haven't you? Because if the producer thinks it's acceptable, whatever this behavior might be, then they're not on your side.
Yes, and I had that conversation with said person, and this, it was like sort of think about it. And the reason why I didn't walk in the end was because there was like 2 weeks left. 2 weeks is 2 weeks. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And actually, for the rest of the amazing stage management team, I didn't want them in that position. But the 2 weeks were fine, but it did leave a sort of unhappy taste in my mouth about what that situation was. And certainly then when it got to a point where the cast were really unhappy, I was the one that was sent in to speak to them. And I was like, of course I will, because that's my job. But if you would listen to me, that's the starter of so many sentences in my life internally. If only you had listened
to me in the first place. And I do, obviously the reporting mechanism is there, in the contracts. The reporting mechanism is laid out for you. But then if the person you report to doesn't think it's a real thing or doesn't do anything, then unfortunately you've got to make your own decision. I think, Jackie, we live in a world now that is much more accepting of you as a stage manager going, no, do you know what? I don't feel safe in this job, or there's been evidence of this, and this, and I'm giving you my notice. Thank you very much. I think all of those things we worried about when we were much younger, about, oh my God, I'm never going to get another job, I don't think they exist in the same way now. I mean, clearly, if you kept leaving every job you worked on, then that would be a different matter. But, and like, let's face it, we all mainly know, don't we? You hear stuff about different shows and about different tours, and you're like, oh,
absolutely.
So I do think that's better. Now, obviously, if it's a personal issue, then that is trickier, because otherwise it sounds a bit like kindergarten, doesn't it? I don't like Jackie and she doesn't like me. And you're like, well, but that brings us back to the thing that you were saying before, that we don't actually have to be everybody's friend. We can just do the job, right? We can just get on and do the job.
For sure. And, it's gone from my head. Oh, look at this. I can chop this bit out for sure. There was another episode.
Middle-aged women make a podcast.
I haven't called you like by another name yet.
So the thing that we haven't mentioned yet, and I wonder whether we sort of did it deliberately, is we've not mentioned the union. Because certainly in the UK and in America, there's a great union that you can belong to, and they both happen to be called sort of the same name. And Equity is there to support you, and they are there almost to support you more for when things go wrong than when things go right. Because if you need to phone somebody, if you need some advice, if you need some support, that's exactly what they're there for. And I think maybe we sometimes forget about them. We pay our dues to them and I'm a member of Equity. But actually, that's their job, is to help support us when things go wrong. Maybe financially things go wrong and a company don't pay you, or maybe something happens in your life and you're not very well and you need a bit of support to get you through that, or whether you're on a job that turns toxic. They're there to offer your advice. And sometimes their advice will be how to get yourself out of that contract. But
I never think of them in terms of mediation. I would never go for them in terms of that support. And isn't it interesting? And when you say it, of course, I know that's what they're there for, and I know that's their remit, and I know that's probably their number one, function. But if somebody says to me, "Oh, would you," that classic scenario, you get students graduate and they go, "Oh, what would you recommend, Equity or SMA?" And you go through the thing of they're very different organisations. But actually, what's the first thing I recommend about Equity? Oh, yeah, join Equity for their pension.
Whereas I would say join Equity for their public liability insurance. But yes. But no, I mean, there are equity heads for each of the contracts in the United Kingdom. FYI, Americans listening in, our contract system is much simpler. We only have really 3. That's what they're there for, right?
And absolutely. And I will echo this now, that Simon, who we've had on this podcast, who is our Wales and the Southwest rep, he is hugely, hugely supportive. And the couple of times where I've contacted for a question or just a bit of advice or a ponder, and that's not necessarily to do with when things go wrong, it's other things, Simon's always super, super quick to respond and will always provide the advice that you need. So they are there, but isn't it interesting that I personally, I don't see them as that sort of mediation support advice when things go wrong.
Well, and they're really there for when it goes really serious, right? Because say somebody issues some kind of grievance against you, which obviously we all hope wouldn't happen, but it could, then you absolutely, if you're summoned to a meeting, you can take an equity rep with you. You can take one of a member like Simon from Wales and West with you to the meeting. They will go with you as your support and to help mediate with you. So, that is exactly what they're there for. Somebody said to me the other day, and this is a different analogy, but it's the same one. Somebody was like, oh no, you could get anybody to do that job. Oh, let's just go with that. And I said, no, the problem is you don't pay anybody to do that job. You pay somebody who's really experienced to do that job so they can dig you out when things go wrong. And that's how I feel about equity. Is like we pay the money every month, but actually when the going gets tough, that's what we need to, that's who we need to reach out to, because that's what we pay our subs for. That's what they're there for. And they can offer you advice as to whether procedures have been followed correctly or whether they've not, and how to support you through that. So I think, as well as having your own phone a friend, the other thing is from an industry perspective, who is there to support you. And certainly Equity, that's part of their job. That's what they do. Oh, and my other top tip would be write everything down, because your memory causes tricks on you. So if something goes wrong in work, or somebody says something to you, or whatever, make a note of it. Just write down what was said, because when you think about it several days later, or somebody comes to talk to you about it, you might well have forgotten or misremembered it. So writing things down, I think, is really important as well.
We have a saying in our house that I will give full reference and citation to. It's from Huxley Pig. Remember Huxley Pig?
Yeah. And
Huxley Pig says, if in trouble, if in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. And I think that's a very...
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand By Please. Join us next time when we'll be talking job titles. Until then, Jackie and Antonia, off cans.